My name is John Shea. I'm a former Irish mobster. I was an associate of crime lord Whitey Bulger. This is how crime works. Growing up in South Boston, that's one of the things you're taught. Never become a rat. Throughout time, the loyalty and the honor has been diminished immensely. Sometimes people get very greedy. Greed is what takes you down. And that's what took Whitey Bulger down, greed. I think why so many Irish became so successful is because they predominantly were the nationality, especially coming from Southie, doctors, lawyers, politicians, and gangsters. We had it all. Well, Boston, it's not a large city, but it's a quaint city. And at that time, we had different sections. You had your Irish sections. You had your minority sections. I happened to come from the largest Irish enclave in Boston, South Boston, AKA Southie. You also had 3 of the biggest projects in Massachusetts in South Boston. And, growing up in the projects, not everybody has that much money, so they're always looking to gain. I get into boxing at the age of 5. My sister, she said, you're gonna go to the gym and you're gonna learn how to box and you're gonna learn how to defend yourself. So I did. The guys from the boxing gym were drug dealers. They were making so much money, it was so enticing. I wanted to make that money also. I got involved in selling drugs, robbing jewelry stores, robbing trucks, delivery trucks. We'd wait for the driver to go in and we'd open the back of his truck and take whatever merchandise was available at that time. And then we'd resell it back to the store for cheaper. So the drugs were being sold sometimes on the street, on the corner. A lot of times it was sold in the bars in Southie. And one of the bars was Triple O's. Most people weren't able to sell in Triple O's. They didn't want you selling drugs in there. But yet, I was able to. The whispers in South Boston didn't go unnoticed. Everybody knows everybody, sort of, if you will. The problem is that you had to, keep your business to yourself, even if somebody suspects something or they hear something, because if more than one person knows your business, and everybody does. It's funny, when you're in the mob, there's always some type of nickname that you get. Of course, mine was Red. It's always because you've done something or some type of look that you have. Steve Flemmi was in the Korean War, and he became a sharpshooter, and that's why he was the rifleman. Cadillac Frank, that nickname, you always said, nothing but the best, a Cadillac. I would say being in the Irish mob is kind of like being in the Italian mob. You represent your heritage. Well, I'm happy to be Irish, that's for sure. And I know the struggles that the Irish had gone through. I think that's another reason why in Southie, with the Irish, that you didn't become an informant or a rat. It dates back to the old country, if you will, not having someone being a traitor against Ireland. The Irish, they like to get the clatter and the heart and all that to show their pride for their heritage. I didn't have any tattoos. You're more susceptible to be spotted. Whitey Bulger, if you mentioned his name or heard his name, back then he was like a mythical type of individual. Everybody thought that this guy was unbelievably intelligent in the way he maneuvered and how ruthless he could be. I was introduced to Whitey by Kevin Weeks. Basically, he was his assistant and his aide, if you will, in the Irish mob. Some people were bookmakers. Whitey made money from that. Some people were into marijuana. Whitey made money from that. But his biggest entity was the drug business, the cocaine business. It was always a myth that Whitey didn't deal in drugs. He did not allow heroin or he did not allow angel dust. Angel dust, when you're on that stuff, you know, you're unpredictable. Billy Shea was the leader of that crew that sold the drugs for Whitey. He said, "Why don't you come with us?" And that's when I was recruited into that gang. I was in a crew where I was the youngest of all. This was in the late 80s. I started making trips every month to Miami, having one of my guys drive a car with all the money in it. Sometimes I'd fly down, sometimes I'd drive with him. After purchasing multiple kilos, we distributed it from there. It's a long ride. It's a long haul. And usually you'd like to drive during the day, and that way you're amongst a lot of other cars and you're inconspicuous. Prior to me doing all those kilos, my first kilo I had gone to Key Largo, Florida. I purchased a key of cocaine and I opened it up. I strapped it to myself and I flew on the airplane with that. At that time you could. I would bring it home and I would be, if you will, the chemist, because I knew what I was doing. I'd break it up and we'd make as small as an 8-ball to a half an ounce, to an ounce, to a half a kilo, or to a kilo. Whatever amount you were looking for, we had it for you. Billy Shea wanted me to start taking some of the cocaine and replacing it with non-cocaine. So I said, if you do that, you're gonna disrupt the potency of it. Customers are gonna complain. He said, I don't care, I'm the boss. You listen to me. So I did. I started taking some of that cocaine and selling it on the side without anybody else knowing it, and he wanted a piece of it. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was right. So eventually, the other guys in the crew caught on that there was a problem, the weakness of the cocaine. So they went to Whitey afterwards, had a discussion with Whitey. Billy Shea was in Florida, and he got a phone call to come back from Florida to Boston, that Whitey wanted to see him. Whitey met up with him, and he told him, you made me a lot of money, and I'm not gonna kill you. But you're gonna retire. After Billy Shea was gone, there was someone that needed to take over, and that was me. You had other Irish mobs throughout the United States, the Westies in New York, Jimmy Coonan. Then you had the Rat, Featherstone, who sunk them all, and they all went away from one guy. The Irish mob in Boston was more business-orientated, constructed much better because of Whitey and his intelligence, making money, running things. The Winter Hill Gang was a gang that was based in Somerville. Whitey Bulger became a part of that gang. Howie Winters became the boss of the Winter Hill Gang in the 70s. And eventually, Howie Winters went to prison because he was set up by Whitey and Stevie Flemmi. Then the next group of Irish was the Mullen Gang, ran by Tommy King. Tommy King didn't like Whitey. He didn't last long either. Whitey eventually took him out with all his other people. He buried them on the side of the highways. He buried them on a beach when the water went out. That's when Whitey Bulger became the head of all of the Irish mob in Boston. It was 1979 when he took over. And the reason why he was so successful is because he had the FBI backing him up. Unbeknownst to anyone else, because if anyone else found out that he was an informant, then he wouldn't have lasted. Well, for us in the Irish mob, sometimes you'd show up at the local meeting point, and usually that was a store or a liquor store that Whitey eventually owned. There was Triple O's, the bar. There was a base that Whitey had, and that was the Liquor Mart, liquor store, that he actually extorted. Yeah, he extorted. He gave some money, but not the full price, if you will. It was either take this deal or you won't have a deal, because you'll end up in the ocean. You'd go in there and you'd say hello, And if there was anything that he needed to tell you, he'd tell you. But other than that, you basically were running the show yourself for him and just making all the money. You had a lot of carte blanche with that. For the drug business, there was a crew. If you were selling drugs and if there was a dispute with another gang, that usually was settled by some words, because nobody wanted to have a gang war. There was a mutual respect. Everybody was trying to make money. It was about making money. Whitey was at the top. He was the brains of it all. And Stevie was his partner. When it came to violence, they were capable of getting rid of somebody. Steve Flemmi, I always got along with Stevie. He loved to work out, and he was a health fanatic and eating properly, such as juicing. He actually gave me books on it also, what recipes to make for juicing and what vegetables were good for ailments. And
when everything came to light about everything that he'd done, obviously like multiple murders, how did you end up feeling about that?
You always knew and heard through the grapevine and the whispers in the neighborhood how ruthless Stevie and Whitey could be. But you never asked those questions. You could never ask those questions. Otherwise, you'd be dead too. All those murders that those guys had committed, I didn't feel anything personally because I was happy that I was able to survive. Kevin Weeks, basically, Kevin could handle himself. Whitey liked to have that around him. If he needed to have a message sent, he'd ask Kevin, hey, go see this guy, go see that guy. Kevin was, for me, when we were together, was like an older brother to me. I could confide into Kevin, and I never had an older brother. I guess that's one thing that I always appreciated. But eventually, he decided to cooperate, and that's when our friendship ended. I remember one time, Whitey and Kevin shook down a drug dealer, and that drug dealer worked for me. And I didn't get it because I was affording that drug dealer the protection. That's what they got when they worked for me. They got protected. They didn't have to worry about someone bothering them. And here is Whitey shaking this drug dealer down for very little money. So I went into a meeting and I asked, why? I don't get it. That kid's being protected by me and us. So as I was having that discussion with Kevin, Jim, Whitey, he come walking in. He said, what's the problem? I was just wondering why we would hurt somebody that's helping us. He said, because he's not part of the inner circle. The only real friend Whitey ever had, after all that was said and done, the only real friend was himself. And quite frankly, when you're in the mobster world, in that gangster world, that's pretty much how you have to be. Because usually, when you go down, it's usually the guy that's closest to you that takes you down. In Boston, you had the Italian mafia at the time, and at the time we were in, that was a guy named Jerry Angiulo. Eventually, Angiulo went down with his crew. And it's funny because in court tapes, you could hear Jerry Angiulo, the head boss, saying, Stevie and Whitey, they'll kill anybody we want. So the Irish had done, obviously, some of the Italians' dirty work, just like the Westies. The Westies, they helped eliminate people, too, for the Italians. Well, Whitey always said, he said, you know, the Italians are different from us. They like to dress up and be on the street corner and all that. He said, and that's drawing attention to yourself. The Irish, they had some great clothing, but it was more low-key. I just didn't think it was in the heritage of the Irish to be that fancy. You have great clothing that came from Italy. So it was in their culture to have nice things like that and to look brilliant, if you will. The Irish were definitely a working class. Island, through the history, has definitely had tremendous struggles. The Irish mob does not have, technically speaking, an initiation feature. It's all by the individual and knowing that individual and how they carry themselves and what they've done, is such as maybe robbing things, selling cocaine, killing. That shows that you have the guts and the brawn and the will to be involved in that life. I went through a test, and I found it very odd at the time. I was brought into a basement. Whitey come out of the shadows with Kevin Weeks and put the Uzi toward me. Asked me about friends and guys that associated with. How much money do they have? Where's their money? I said, whatever they have is through me. I gave it to them. I wasn't gonna sell those guys out for anything. I was willing to die. He counted for me not to be a rat. He tested that, and he found out that I wouldn't be. With Whitey, if he recruited you and wanted you with him, you could have said no, you know, but I can tell you one thing, if you said no and you continue to do crimes and stuff like that, you would have had a problem. You would have definitely had a problem. But if you decided and said, you know what, I'm done with all of it. I'm not doing anything, and I don't want to be associated. And you hadn't actually done anything with Whitey, so you couldn't say anything against him because you hadn't done anything with him. You were capable to walk away then. But if you had been with Whitey and wanted to walk away, I think he would have thought different. Whitey's family was very powerful. His brother was the head of the state senate in Massachusetts, another very intelligent individual in himself. He was a triple eagle, they called it. So he went to Boston College High School, Boston College itself, and then Boston College Law. I grew up with my mother and my three sisters, so I was always looking for that father figure, if you will. And in the gangster world, I found it. If I go back in time, if I could, I definitely would have stuck with boxing. I had the ability. I had the ability to be good, but I chose the other route because it was easier, because it was lucrative. I wouldn't have lost those years, and I wouldn't have been involved in some bad things. I wouldn't really come out and preach to anyone for their decisions, but I would just say maybe learn from other people's mistakes. Years ago, with the Winter Hill gang, there was a horse racing fixing with Howie Winters. There was a loan sharking business, absolutely. There was also bookmaking. People would put their bets in. Today it's a dying business because now you can put your bet on your phone. I mean, you had bookmakers that would walk up and down Broadway in South Boston that just took the book, whether it was for sports or whether it was for the daily number, if you will, in the lottery. I made money growing up in many different ways, but the most profitable was drugs. It was cocaine. I was averaging at least $20,000 to $25,000 a week, profit-wise. Now you have to realize that you have to keep fueling the business with money. So we would sit at the table every 2 weeks, and we'd have all this money in a pool, count it all up with money machines, and then everybody would get a slice of the pie. I'd usually, again, walk out $20,000, $25,000 every week. But every 2 weeks, most of the time, it was split up. So you're walking out sometimes with, $50,000. And if it was a really good couple of weeks, you could be walking out of that house with $100,000. I started going to nice dinners and vacationing in nice places, whether it be Florida or Montreal. Fine wines? Absolutely. There were Margaux, there were Rothschilds, and a lot of the times I got that very inexpensive because the kids, they'd go into the liquor store and they would steal steal the wine and then come see me and sell it to me. So I'd have a $400, $500 bottle of wine for $75 or $80. I think the biggest rules for any of these organizations, never rat, never become a rat, ever. Honor the code, honor the life. And there's so many that couldn't live up to that. Most of the time, it's the guys on top. There wasn't an official rules list. It was the schooling of Whitey. So the biggest rules that Whitey had was he liked people who exercised, who lived clean, didn't use drugs, didn't drink a whole lot. Someone who respected themselves and somebody who carried themselves with respect. You had your territories with Southie was all of Whitey's, and then you had Charlestown, and they had a small crew over there, and they were Irish, but they weren't as big. You had the Italians in the North End. You had Italians in the West End of Boston. Everybody had their own spot in their areas, and everybody respected everybody, believe it or not. Again, nobody wants to go to war. Everybody's trying to make money. It's a business. There was a previous gang war years back, and it was amongst Winter Hill gangs and other fractions in Charlestown. It finally got settled, but before it was settled, there was a lot of people who died. A lot of the weapons were stolen weapons. Gun stores would be broken into, and the guns would be stolen and then sold to the guys on the street. I cannot tell you how many guns I had. As a matter of fact, when I got indicted, I had a lot of bullets, and they wanted to know where the guns were for those particular bullets, because I didn't have the guns there. I had another place that was holding those other guns. Most of my guns were from people who robbed the gun stores and sold them to me. Handguns, could be a .45, a MAC-10, could be a 9mm, it could be even a rifle. They always used to have what they call a pump shotgun, and it was a riot shotgun. It was a police one, actually. It was probably stolen from a police department years ago. So my daily day was I'd get up, if we weren't paid yet, I would start and go collect the money from different people who were our customers. I had a customer that didn't want to pay one time and tried to hide. That customer owed me $10,000 at the time. So I kept looking out for him and asking for him, and he wasn't there. And finally, one day I seen him. I couldn't let it go by. I couldn't let this guy think that he could beat me for $10,000. Because if I let this one individual do that, then more individuals are going to think that they can do it. So I waited for this individual. I had laid a baseball bat in the gutter, knowing he was going to be coming out of his house at a certain time, because I clocked him. I watched him for about a week. It was in the evening, and I was dressed in black. Well, he started to come out of his house. I was walking down the street. I bent down and pulled up the bat from the gutter, and I used that bat on him. He was left in the gutter, full of blood. I sent a message to let everybody know that I wasn't to be beaten. I don't think anybody should be beating anybody. I have a product, I sell it to you. You don't pay me, you're robbing me, you're beating me. Today, I feel as though pretty much the same way. People shouldn't be doing that to each other. And if somebody does do that, there should be circumstances. Absolutely. 100%. There are people who did get hurt and families that had lost loved ones, and and stuff like that, which is absolutely respected and understood. Nobody ever wants to lose anybody that they love, especially a family member. I think most of the time these movies that are made about mobs or mobsters are not always accurate. Take, for instance, Black Mass. I thought the book was better than the movie, that's for sure. Johnny Depp invited me on set when he was being made up to look like Whitey, and I hadn't seen Whitey in so long. And the disdain that I had for Whitey, for becoming a rat, and I'll tell you, they did such a great job. I thought it was Whitey, and I started getting sick to my stomach because I wanted to react. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to just annihilate him. I had to get up and walk outside and get some air. And I come back in, I said, Johnny, I apologize, but he goes, John, I am so sorry that I didn't even realize that would affect you like that, and I know it's been so long. I had a great opportunity to be on the set of The Potter with Mark Wahlberg. I got to do a little bit of reading with him for his character, which was so fun. Mark Wahlberg was getting ready for the movie Invincible, a football movie. So Mark was throwing the football around, and we were in New York, in Brooklyn, and that was where they were shooting part of the movie. And so me and Mark were throwing the football around, and here comes Alec Baldwin, who played in the movie. So he grabs a ball from Mark, and he threw the ball at me, but he threw it so hard, and it was like kind of like, it was very mean the way he threw the ball, vicious. And he threw it so hard, he almost broke my thumb. So I took the ball, of course, and threw it as hard as I could back at him. And I started to go after Alec Baldwin, but Mark stopped me. So when I threw the ball back at Alec Baldwin, he had wrenched his back. So when he was walking around on set, he was kind of walking like a duck. So Mark would, just to keep me calm and cool, hey, Johnny, who's this? And he walked like a duck. So we had a little bit of fun doing that. I've seen payments being had to law enforcement, absolutely. Whether it's through a friend, a family member, it happens. Usually, a couple $1,000 would make things work for you. There's always some type of corruption somewhere, no matter what entity it is, whether it's the mob world or even in the police department or even with the FBI. And it could be here in Boston, or it could be in Chicago, it could be in New York, and that's just the way life goes. That's human nature. John Connolly was Whitey's main guy with the FBI. John Connolly handled everything for Whitey. With Stevie Flemmi, he gave up his friend Cadillac Frank Salemi, and when Salemi was on the run, who arrested him in New York on the streets? John Connolly, the FBI agent. So these guys worked hand in hand together. John Morris from the FBI, here's another guy who's a top guy, and he was unfaithful. He was taking money and gifts and everything from Whitey. Yep. Oh, they did a lot to go after the mob in Boston, the FBI, especially the Italian mob. They took down the Italian mob, and John Connolly was the head of that. And he was afforded with all that information through Whitey and Stevie. They wanted to take their competition out. So in 1990, I was indicted. I was indicted with 51 others. My name was at the top of the indictments. It was an 848, and that statute is kingpin status. And that carries 20 years to life. And they said to me, tell us everything when you won't go to prison. Cooperate. I said, there's no way I'll do that. I tried to be strong-minded and not think about if I have to do life or if I'm going to get life. I tried not to think about it. All I tried to think about is just be the man I'm supposed to be and accept full responsibilities for the wrongs I've done and not put that burden on anyone else's shoulders. I was sitting inside, and even when they were indicted and they weren't even known as informants yet, it wasn't out yet, I was sitting in my cell and I was sending information to one of my attorneys to help them defeat the informants against them. So I was being loyal even while I was doing my time, even more loyal. Once you testify any of these badges that you had, or any of these stripes that you had, you lost them all. They're all gone. Well, being in the mob and having that reputation coming from the street, especially with a major case like that, and yeah, so whether it was Italian mobsters inside or Irish guys, they knew who you were. We were definitely accepted gracefully, respected. When you go to prison, you have your mobsters and you have your gangs and stuff like that. But in federal prison, the Boston guys stuck together. Whether they're gangsters or not, they all stuck together. And vice versa for the New York guys. So it was a state-by-state thing. And by the way, the Boston guys were some of the most respected in the system. Rivalries were amongst gangs more than it was with the mobsters. For me, I was a boxer, so it was second nature to be able to not be fearful, but be cautious. I got out in 2002 after 12 years. I'm a union worker. I'm in construction. I deal mostly with concrete. I'm very fortunate that I was able to get into the union. I'm very fortunate to get back on my feet, and the union has been absolutely fabulous to me in my life. I never thought about writing anything or ever even talking about my story because I was so tight-lipped. But I said, mostly all these stories are always told by the opposite, the informant, the guy who became a rat. Why can't a stand-up guy tell his side of the story too? My book became a New York Times bestseller. I've been so lucky to have Mark Wahlberg write the introduction. I owe a lot to Mark. And then I wrote a young adult book. It's called A Kid From Southie. Sometimes, yeah, I'm recognized, absolutely. It wasn't long ago I was working and on a construction job, and I was out on the street, and there was a guy that walked by and he goes, "Excuse me." I said, "Yeah, how can I help you?" He said, are you read Shea? I said, "Yes." He said, "Wow, I read your book, I loved it." So, occasionally you'll get that. So the day Whitey was finally caught from being on the run for 16 years, actually, he was caught in Santa Monica. When they caught him and they found all the money within the walls and the guns, and he had a section of books because he's an avid reader and always preached that. Well, one of those books happened to be mine. So, of course, he was murdered in federal prison. I did an interview on CNN, and I said if he goes into population, general population, he won't last long. You go in there as a rat amongst them, you're not going to survive. And that's what happened. He didn't survive. There'll never be another Winter Hill or Irish mob like it was ever again. In today's society, you have to realize there's more cameras everywhere in the world where you can't get away with anything anymore. Most of your crimes are probably cyber crimes. You'll never have that inner city feeling, family type of thing, if you will. And that was the thing for me. At times, it felt like I had a family with inside the mob. The notion hit me of the end of the Boston mafia when everyone got indicted, and then all the top guys, except myself, became informants. I knew it was all over once every one of them became informants. The game's over now.
Hi, I'm a producer on How Crime Works. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment below with more ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in this series.